Good morning. This is a great theater. It's a great time to be a Marine. It's good to be back to Quantico. My heart is here. Probably the hardest job I ever worked was the job General Flynn's got right now. I mean, I'm working pretty hard right now. But the truth of the matter is the toughest job I had was down here, working on requirements, working on training and combat development, all of that. So we lived up on the hill where General Flynn lives. Great house, great base. So it's good for me to be back here. I'm joined up here with my sidekick, Sergeant Major Kent. You know, he and I talked about this, about our team, some time ago. Just when this thing was beginning to kind of break that I was going to be nominated to be the 35th Commandant. And I had this kind of cold rush in my heart. I thought, well, I guess when I take over, that means I've got to go through the whole effort of finding another Sergeant Major. But I really love this guy. And if I'd have been Jim Conway 4 years ago, and I'd have interviewed all the Sergeant Major that came through and their spouses, I'd have picked Carlton Kent. That's how much I think of him. I was relieved a little bit when I found out that Sergeant Major Kent and I are going to be a team for another 6 or 7 months. So it's great. He's a great Sergeant Major. You've got a wonderful Sergeant Major in the Marine Corps. It's fun those few times when General Conway would loan him on a custody card to the old ACMAC. He and I would go around together and poke at one another and just have a great time. So, Sergeant Major, I'm just glad that we're still going to be a team for quite some time to come. Look, I've got some slides up here, and I want to talk. Here's how this morning's going to go. Let me back up a little bit. I'm going to talk to you about the Commandant's planning guidance. And there's not a lot of slides up here, so I'm not going to kill you with PowerPoint. But it's the meaty things that are important to me and are important to our United States Marine Corps. When we looked at the planning guides, and I started fussing with this thing really about 90 days ago, when it was all in the preliminary stages. I was working my way with a small group of Marines that were kind of helping me focus. We sent Marines out in the fleet to gather information about what commanders, what senior leaders, sergeants major, master gunnies, commanders at the lieutenant colonel level, commanders at the colonel level. I wanted to find out what you thought were the major issues as it relates to the Marine Corps that we look forward for the next couple of decades, certainly for the next 4 years. And we got that feedback. We sent Marines, we sent teams up and down the East Coast, West Coast, sent them to 29 Palms, sent them to Hawaii, Mid-Pac, all the way out to West-Pac. So I have that feedback. I sat with all my 3-stars, every single 3-star general, and I talked to them about the issues that they see for the Corps for the next 4 years. I wanted to get their perspective. I thought I had it. I mean, I thought I understood it pretty well. But I wanted to hear from them. And as a result of that, and my own personal notes and just things that are important to me after being a Marine for 4 decades and having been a Commandant, or excuse me, the Assistant Commandant, the other jobs I've held, to be honest with you, we kind of had a pretty good sense, I did, for where the Marine Corps needed to go for the next 4 years. So I wrote the Commandant's planning guidance. It's been out. I hope a lot of you have seen it. If you've not, it's on the web. You can get it electronically, and you need to see it. If you're a Lance Corporal out there and you go, you know, Commandant doesn't care what I think. I'm just a Lance Corporal. That's not true. You're the Lance Corporal that's someday going to be the Sergeant. You're the Lance Corporal someday that's going to be the gunny. You're important. You're an important part of the future of our Marine Corps. We've got some interesting times we're about to enter. As the economy begins to, or as we begin to realize some of the effects of the economy in the Department of Defense. So I need your help. All right, so what I'm going to do this morning is we're going to run through the things that are important to us as a Marine Corps. I'm going to try to not use the personal pronoun. I'm going to talk about us as United States Marines. At the end of my section in my planning guidance, the part that talks about our ethos. I say being a U.S. Marine is the single most important thing. It transcends being a general. It's important, more important than being a colonel or a lance corporal, being a commandant. What's most important is being a U.S. Marine. When I wrote the Commandant's Planning Guidance, I wrote a letter to begin with to all our families, to all our Marines, with a short paragraph in there to General and Mrs. Conway. And I said, thanks. Thanks for being the role models and that couple that wherever they went, everybody looked and said, that's my Commandant. And that's his lady. There was no doubt in anybody's mind when Jim and Annette Conway stepped center front. I wanted to thank them for that. The second section of my Commandant's Planning Guidance was written specifically for you. I spent a lot of time on it, and I had a lot of help. But it was written to you, and it talks about who we are. It talks about what this means to have the eagle, globe, and anchor tattooed on our hearts and our souls. And I did that for a reason, because as we look forward and we kind of plan on what's going to happen in the Corps, you have to always go back and remember who you are, because we're different. We are a unique breed of Americans that come less than 1/10 of 1% that are willing to sacrifice and suffer for one another. I talk about that strange feeling that goes inside of you when the Marine Corps hymn is played. And you get those goosebumps. And you kind of feel like the hair is standing up on the back of your neck. 4 decades of being a Marine, and it hasn't gone away. Every now and then, my eyes get teary when I think about being a Marine. Not about being a Commandant, not about being a 3-star general, but about being a Marine. That's the second section. The third section is I talk about the future security environment. I want you to understand where we are going to do our business for our nation, more than likely for the next several decades. When I was down to General Flynn's job, we spent about a year and a half writing General Conway's vision for 2025. I spent almost a year traveling around this nation, talking to think tanks, flying to other countries, talking about their vision of what the world is going to look like over the next several decades. You'll see that in here, and I'll talk about the future security environment in here. And based on who we are, what the world is likely going to look like that we're going to operate in, then I say, Marines, these are the important things that we're going to do. These are the things that we're going to do. And I'll get into it. It's organized that way. Next slide, please. So pictures of the future security environment. I mean, this could be a host of different cities throughout the world. And I'll talk about some of the attributes of where we're going to find ourselves, but Marines are going to find themselves in places like this. We're going to find ourselves in urban areas, tightly contested, areas that are probably some of what we might consider to be the least desirable places to operate in. That's where Marines are going to find themselves over the next 2 decades. Next slide. The future security environment. Now, I'm going to describe this. This does not mean that the Marine Corps will not be prepared, ready, and understand its responsibility in major theater war. We will do that, and should major theater war take place, we will be on the forefront of that. You can take it to the bank. The same way we were when we crossed the border in March of 2003 into Iraq, the same way we were when the 1st Provisional Brigade was formed by General MacArthur, and we cobbled together the Marines and surrounded the city of Seoul and took back Seoul after the landing at Incheon. So we will be at the forefront of any major theater war. That is probably the high end, and I would hope the least likely of all the scenarios we're going to find ourselves in. The most likely is going to be operating in this kind of environment. Where you saw the pictures of the urban areas, You take a look at what's happening around this world, there's a tendency towards urbanization. Populations are going back into cities. They're going to be in areas that are going to be tightly contested by gangs, by criminal organizations, by terrorist, extremist organizations, but they are going back to cities because that's where they find sanctuary. If they're out in the countryside and the suburbs, it's easy to deal with them. But in the cities, they become faceless and nameless and hard to deal with. Overpopulation. You take a look at Central Europe. Europe, as we typically think about it and know it, that population density is decreasing in Central Europe, and yet in the what we call the developing areas of the world, the population is exploding. It's exploding with young men and women. And you take that and you take this, the fact that there's going to be a lack of education and jobs in a lot of these, what we call contested areas. All of a sudden you've got a recipe, you've got unemployment, you've got young males, and you've got extremist ideology. And it doesn't take a lot for us to think about gangs and how do gangs in parts of our country take root. What causes a young man or a woman to want to join a gang? First of all, they probably come from a bad family or a family that's dysfunctional. They want to join an organization that gives them a sense of identity. They kind of take up a cause. And they were an outsider on the rest of society, but in a gang, they become an insider. That's what's going to happen in the world over the next 2 decades. In these areas that are underdeveloped, that are actually what we call kind of developing nations, but they're developing only because their populations are growing. But these are the areas along the littoral parts of the world where Marines are going to find themselves operating. Poverty, lack of education, competition for resources. There's prognostications, in other words, folks that are making guesses that water will become a more valuable commodity than fossil fuels will be. They'll pay more. There are people in this world that will pay more for a gallon of fresh water than they will for a gallon of gasoline or a gallon of diesel fuel. Competition for resources is going to be extreme in these developing countries. It's all going to be fueled by extremism, recruitment by criminal gangs. If you don't think that's the case, just take a look what's going on some of our borders right now with criminal activity, drugs. We see that in some of the places we're operating in right now, to include even Afghanistan. And finally, the thing that probably is the most frightening of all is we have all this recipe, this alchemy of what the world's going to look like, that we're going to fight in, that we're going to be a part of, that we're going to interdict, we're going to train in, we're going to be called to work in. And many of these people are going to have access to some of the most deadly weapons available. They have it because they're funded by organizations that have a lot of money. They're going to have the best in technology. Remember when the Hezbollah launched that unmanned aerial vehicle and it flew out into the Mediterranean and almost sank the Israeli frigate? How did they get that technology? How did they get that weapons? They got it because they could afford it. They got it because they're funded by extremists. So that's the world we're going to work in, more than likely. Again, it doesn't mean we're not going to be prepared for a major theater war, but I think, based on everything I've been able to read and study, this is where the Marine Corps is going to do its work when we come out of Afghanistan. Next slide. The role of the Marine Corps in that environment. A little bit of everything for all of us in here, to include humanitarian assistance. I don't want it to escape anybody in this room that last May, when that terrible disaster hit our neighbor country, Haiti, 7 U.S. Navy amphibious ships full of 5,000 United States Marines and sailors boarded and went to Haiti and were there for 45 days. Do not take that for granted. The Marines were coming ashore in helicopters and their landing craft. They brought water. They provided medical support. They stayed there for 45 days. They were able to come ashore in places that nobody else could. And we know how to operate in austere conditions. We did that. Turn the clock forward to just about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, when Pakistan had the terrible floods, the monsoons that flooded the entire country. You saw those pictures of those heavy lift helicopters, the CH-53s, the United States Marine Corps painted on the side of it. And while we're in the middle of a war in Afghanistan, and while Harriers off the Peleliu were flying combat operations and sorties, and while Marines off the Peleliu were doing their work, their good work in Afghanistan, the 53 Echo helicopters were flying 400 miles north, inland, carrying water, medical supplies, taking refugees, moving them around the country, getting them out of harm's way. We did that for almost 2 months, and we're on the tail end of it right now. And by the way, while that was happening, one of the ships of the 15th MEU sailed due west and captured the Magellan Star away from the pirates. So all that's going on while we're sitting here at Quantico. Next slide. Here's the role of the Marine Corps. This is a mission statement. Now, there was a period of time in my life I was a deputy on the MAGTF staff training program, headquartered right here at Quantico. And I can write a mission statement. I've done it both in training and I've done it for real, many, many, many times. This is not a good example of how to write a mission statement. It's too long. It's got too much. But I tried to figure out how I could capture for you and for everybody else that's going to take a look at where the Marine Corps is headed, what we are going to do. So it's wordier, it's longer than I like. But let's take a look at some of the things that are critically important. We are now, and we are going to be America's expeditionary force in readiness. Marines, that's when people say, what is the Marine, tell me, son or daughter or friend, what does the Marine Corps do? We are America's expeditionary force in readiness. That last word in there, in readiness, implies an awful lot. That implies a force that is ready today, to go today, to fight today's battles. Last December, early December, when our president spoke at West Point, and he talked to the nation, and he announced in a major strategy speech that he was going to increase the U.S. force level in Afghanistan by 30,000. 10,000 of those would be United States Marines. Now, we already had almost 11,000 Marines on the ground at that time. But he made that announcement, and I think it was a Monday night. The very next day, Marines from 1st Battalion, 6th Marines, were on board Marine C-130s flying Afghanistan. You think about that. No other force has the ability to do that. No other force in our country, quite honestly, has the congressional mandate that we have to be the most ready when the nation is the least ready. That was written in 1952 in the congressional record. You will be, Marine Corps, the most ready when the nation is the least ready. That dictates, that last word, a very high state of readiness. And I'm dedicated, and we will maintain a high state of readiness in the Marine Corps. We are not going to mortgage our readiness, because when the President calls, which is the very last sentence in that mission statement, we're going to be ready. We're going to be ready to do whatever he wants us to do. We're going to be forward deployed and forward engaged. We're a balanced Marine air, ground, logistics team. While we were going through this, writing that mission statement, the whole concept of the importance of logistics just jumped out at me. If we weren't able to take our logistics and have it with us and have it kind of packaged up with us, we wouldn't be ready, and we wouldn't be who we are. Logistics is the linchpin on this entire operation. So we are that balanced force. We create options and decision space for the President. That's an important point. You need to understand that. Can you imagine when something happens around the world? It could be something as bad as as heartbreaking as Haiti. It could be something as heartbreaking as the floods, the monsoons in Pakistan. It could be something that requires absolute combat power and military operations. And you're the President of the United States, and you've got your key leaders together. You've got the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and you're working through this. Okay, what should we do as a nation? What should the United States of America do? In the meantime, we're trying, by the way, that's not always clear. It not always just jumps out at you and you go, I know precisely what we are. While that decision making is going on, the United States Marines will deploy. And we'll provide space and provide our senior leaders options. We will be the forerunner. That's what I want the Marine Corps to be. I want us to be there first. Not some prideful thing with me, but because that's what we get paid to do. I want us to be there first, and I want us to provide some space and some time for our National Command Authority to say, okay, what's the best step? That's what Marines do. We've done it for 235 years. And we're going to continue to do it during my competence. We respond to today's crisis with today's force today. We don't have to wait a month. We don't have to wait 2 months. We closed 10,000 Marines. First of all, we had 1st Battalion, 6 Marines, and 3rd Battalion, 6 Marines on deck in Afghanistan in less than 30 days. We closed the entire force in about 2 months. No other force on the face of the earth could have done that. We enable and participate. This part right up here, we enable and participate in joint and combined operations of any kind. I'm very comfortable with the Marine Corps enabling and helping and assisting our joint partners. We don't have to be in charge of everything. That's not my goal. My goal is to be that force that's there, gets there first, and if it's a humanitarian assistance, then we'll help our partners that are dealing with humanitarian assistance. If it's combat operations, and we have U.S. Army forces flowing in behind us, then I'll be more than happy and pleased to set the conditions for those heavy Army forces to come in behind us. I'm more than happy to set the conditions for Special Operations Forces to flow in. I'm more than happy to provide them and help them with some enablers that we have, whether it be helicopters or logistics or engineers. I'm more than content to do that because we're going to help and we're going to enable our fellow organizations and services and systems. But we're going to be there first. Sometimes we're going to be in charge and sometimes we're not. But we're going to participate. We're going to be team players. We're a middleweight force. I got to tell you what, we spent days talking about how to describe us. I had everything. I had the, sir, you're a general purpose force. Well, I didn't like that. That sounded like the sack of flour. You know, I'm a general purpose flour, so we're going to make biscuits out of the Marine Corps, or bread. I didn't like that. Okay, you're a heavy force. Well, that just means we're fat. We're not going to be fat. That means we can't get there for 120 days because we got to put it on trains, and we got it's too heavy to get on ships, or we can't get it on a C-17 because it won't fit. I don't want to be a heavy force. Okay, you're a lightweight force. Well, shoot, I don't want to be known as a lightweight. You know, let's send in the lightweights. What does that mean? Middleweight. While we're talking about this, I had this vision of a boxer, and we had all these really smart majors in this room. Are kind of grinding through. I'm telling you, Marines, I spent 2 weeks on this. We were doing other things, but we spent 2 weeks every day. We went back and went through this. And I had all these smart majors, and I know that's an oxymoron, but all these smart majors. I got to be careful with what I say now that I'm a commandant. I could get away with that before I can't now, sorry. But they were working with me. They said, "Sir, you can't do it. Middleweight. I mean, people are going, what do you do? And what makes a middleweight?" And so and I said, "Well, it's a boxer. I mean, if you want to box heavyweight, you just go down to Burger King and you eat a few more heavy burgers and a couple of milkshakes, and you step on the scales. Now you're in there with some fat tubble lard, but you're going to outbox him. And then if you really want to have your day, you just get on Nutrisystem for about a week, and now you can get in the lightweight, when you can have your way with that lightweight." And they said, "Sir, the Marines aren't going to identify. They're going to think that's stupid." There was a young sergeant in there who was part of this whole thing while we were going through this. He's a great Marine. And I won't tell you his name because a bunch of you know him. And I said, "What do you think, Devil Dog?" And he said, "Sir, I think it's a great name." He said, "I'm a boxer. I grew up boxing when I was in high school." And he says, "If you're a middleweight guy, I mean, that's the right." And that's what it was. I said, "That's it. The Marine Sergeant named what we are as a force." So all you sergeants out there, you can thank the young Marine Sergeant for telling us that, helping me settle on we're a middleweight force. We operate through all kinds of different spectrums of conflict. We can do special ops. We can do the humanitarian stuff, which is what we call a range of military options. It's all the way on the left-hand side. We can go all the way to the right of the scale, and we can do heavy, heavy combat. We're probably going to operate more than likely by the middle in this hybrid warfare combat. And we're ready to respond when the President calls. By the way, that's a congressional law as well. Next slide. Okay, these are my 4 priorities. Marines, I had hundreds of things that I had been writing over months. Hundreds of things that I got from the sergeants major and the commanders, and hundreds of things I got from my 3 stars. And we kind of rendered them down to 4 major areas. Our first and primary focus, Marines, I want it to be clear to everybody in here, that it is to do our mission in Afghanistan. That is job 1 with me. We are not going to back off of it. We are meeting, by the way, just for your information, with some pretty doggone tremendous success. We have reason to be optimistic. I testified to that in my confirmation hearing to the Senate Armed Services Committee, and I feel even stronger today than I did a month ago or a month and a half ago when I testified. We have every reason to be optimistic. It is not without cause.